My house was completely destroyed in a terrible fire. At 65 years old, I had to seek shelter at my son's house, but he wouldn't let me in, saying his fiancée needed her privacy. In desperation, I called my first love, a man I hadn't seen in 40 years. When he opened the door of his large house, he just said 3 words. "You finally came home." My whole life was changed forever. But before we go any further, please make sure you subscribe to the channel, and let us know in the comments where you're watching this video from. We really love to see how far our stories reach. My name is Loretta, and at 65 I thought I had already gone through every kind of suffering life could possibly throw at me. But I was wrong. It all began on a Wednesday that seemed just like any other day in Atlanta, Georgia. I was in the kitchen making my afternoon coffee when I noticed a strange smell. I decided to see what it was, thinking maybe I had left something on the stove. But when I opened the living room door, I was met with a thick wall of smoke, so dense I could hardly see. Flames were already consuming the curtains and shooting up the walls at an alarming speed that left me frozen for a few critical seconds. The smoke detector should have been going off like crazy, but I found out later that the battery had died months before. A simple thing that would end up costing me everything I owned. I ran back to the kitchen, frantically trying to find the phone to call the fire department. But the smoke was everywhere, making it hard to breathe and even harder to think clearly. I heard glass breaking and knew I had to get out. The flames were devouring my house with a ferocious hunger that seemed impossible to stop. All I could think about was getting out alive. I grabbed my purse from the kitchen table and ran for the back door. The last thing I saw before I made it outside was the portrait of Clarence, my late husband, starting to turn black from the intense heat. My neighbors were already out in the street when I stumbled out, coughing and gasping for air. Miss Hattie, my 78-year-old neighbor, was the first to come running, hugging me as we both stood there helpless, watching the fire destroy the home I had lived in for more than 40 years. The fire department got there within 10 minutes, but it was too late. They were able to prevent the fire from spreading to the other houses nearby, but mine was beyond saving. In just 1 hour, 40 years' worth of memories were turned to ashes. The kitchen table where Darius used to do his homework, the walls that showed how much my son had grown over the years, the bedroom I shared with Clarence for 37 years. All gone. I stood on the sidewalk, wrapped in a blanket someone had put around me, while the firefighters did their job. Later, they told me it was probably a short circuit in an old outlet in the living room. A simple electrical problem that had turned my life into ruins. The flames finally died down, leaving behind a blackened, smoking shell. The fire chief came up to me, his face covered in soot, his eyes filled with a pity I couldn't bear at that moment. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. We did everything we could," he said, but he didn't need to finish the sentence. I could see it for myself. A total loss. Everything I owned, except for the clothes I was wearing and what was in my purse, was gone. The neighbors, who were fortunate enough to still have their homes, took me in for the night. Sweet Miss Hattie insisted I stay with her, but her small apartment was already full of visiting grandchildren. The American Red Cross had set up emergency shelters, but the idea of sleeping in a gymnasium full of strangers just made me feel even more lost. That's when I knew I had to call Darius. My son lives about a 40-minute drive away in Valentine, an upscale suburb of Atlanta with tree-lined streets and houses that look like they came straight out of a magazine. He moved there 4 years ago when he got promoted to regional manager at the insurance company where he works. We weren't close, not the way mothers and sons should be, but he was all the family I had left. I used Miss Hattie's phone because mine had melted along with everything else. "Darius, darling, it's Mom," I said, my voice sounding weaker than I had intended. "Mom, what's going on? You sound upset." "There was a fire, son. The house is gone. Everything's gone." There was a pause that felt like forever. "Were you hurt?" "No, I'm fine. Just a few scrapes and a scratchy throat from the smoke. But I need a place to stay while I figure things out. Just temporarily." Another pause. "Sure, Mom. Come on over. We'll work it out." The relief that flooded through me was so intense that I almost collapsed. My son would take care of me. Despite the distance between us, the missed calls and awkward holiday dinners, he was still my boy. I spent the next morning staring at the charred remains of my house, waiting for the insurance adjuster to arrive. He showed up right at 9 a.m. A young man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, surveying what was left of my home with a clipboard and a camera. "Total loss," he said matter-of-factly, as if those two words didn't represent my entire life. "How much?" I asked, even though I was dreading the answer. "Well, you had a policy of about $200,000 on the structure, but with your deductible and depreciation we're talking maybe $90,000, maybe less." $90,000 to rebuild 42 years of life. Seemed impossible. Miss Hattie helped me buy some basic clothes and toiletries with the emergency money the Red Cross had given me. Everything I now owned fit into one small borrowed suitcase. That was it. That was all I had left of the life I had built. The drive to Darius's house felt like a journey to a foreign country. Everything looks different when you have nowhere to go back to. Familiar places like the gas station where I always bought my lottery tickets and the diner where Clarence and I used to have Sunday breakfast seemed like they belonged to someone else's life. Darius's neighborhood was as perfect as always. Perfect lawns, perfect sidewalks, perfect lives continuing just as they had the day before. I felt like an intruder, bringing my tragedy into their spotless world. His house was a two-story colonial with white shutters and a red door that Tamika, his fiancée, had picked out. I had only met her 3 times in the 2 years they had been together. She was 30 and he was 39. She worked at a marketing firm downtown and had strong opinions about everything from the color of the walls to the type of wine they should serve with dinner. I pulled the cab into their driveway and sat there for a moment, trying to gather my courage. "This is temporary," I told myself. "Just until I can figure out what to do next. Just until the insurance money comes in and I can find a small apartment somewhere." I never imagined that walking up to my son's front door with my little borrowed suitcase would be one of the hardest things I'd ever done. But as I raised my hand to knock, I felt that familiar sinking feeling. The same hollow feeling I'd had when Clarence died. Like the floor was disappearing beneath my feet. I just didn't know how much deeper I was about to fall. Darius opened the door before I could even knock, as if he'd been watching for me. For a moment, seeing his familiar face, Clarence's eyes, my own stubborn chin, made me feel like everything might be okay. He was my son, my only child. Surely blood meant something. "Mom," he said, stepping aside to let me in. But there was something in his voice I couldn't quite figure out. Distance, maybe, or discomfort. Tamika appeared behind him almost immediately, as if she had been waiting in the wings. She was wearing white jeans and a silk blouse that probably cost more than I used to spend on groceries for a whole month. Her brown hair was pulled back in one of those messy buns that somehow looked perfectly styled. And her smile was the kind that never quite reached her eyes. "Loretta, I'm so sorry about your house," she said, but she was looking at my ratty suitcase, not at me. "Darius told me what happened." I put my suitcase down in their spotless entryway, suddenly self-conscious about how I must look. My newly bought clothes, cheap and simple, seemed so out of place against the polished marble of the hall. I could still smell the smoke clinging to my hair, even after taking a shower at Miss Hattie's house. "It's just temporary," I said quickly. "Just until I can get back on my feet." Darius and Tamika exchanged a glance, one of those silent couple conversations that excludes everyone else in the room. Clarence and I had done the same thing countless times, but from the outside, it felt like they were shutting me out of a club I didn't even know existed. "Let's sit down and talk," Darius said, leading me into the living room. Their house was beautiful in the way that houses in magazines are beautiful. Everything matched perfectly. Nothing was out of place. White furniture that looked like no one had ever actually sat on it. Glass coffee tables that reflected the light from windows so clean they looked invisible. It was the kind of house where you were afraid to touch anything. I sat on the edge of the immaculate sofa, my new shoes planted firmly on the flawless hardwood floors. Tamika noticed and flinched slightly. "So what's the plan?" Darius asked, settling into the armchair across from me, not next to me on the sofa where he could have put his arm around his distraught mother, but across from me, as if we were conducting business. Well, the insurance adjuster said it'll take a few weeks to process everything, maybe a month. I was hoping I could stay here until then, just until I can find a small apartment or something. The silence that followed lasted about 10 seconds longer than it should have. I watched Tamika's face change. I saw her jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. She leaned over and put her hand on Darius's arm, a gesture that looked supportive but was clearly possessive. "Mom," Darius began, and I knew from his tone that what was coming next would break my heart. "The thing is, Tamika and I have been talking, and we really value our privacy here. We work long hours, and this is our sanctuary, if you know what I mean." I blinked, not quite understanding. "I wouldn't be in your way. I'd keep to myself. I'll help with cooking, cleaning. I won't be a bother." Tamika leaned forward, her voice soft but firm. "It's not about being a bother, Loretta. It's about space. This house is our first home together, and we're still finding our rhythm as a couple." "I'm his mother," I said, the words coming out sharper than I had intended. "Of course you are," Tamika replied smoothly. "And that's why we thought you'd be more comfortable somewhere else. Somewhere you can have your independence while you rebuild." I looked at Darius, expecting him to disagree with her, to remember that I was the woman who had stayed up with him through every fever, who had worked double shifts to pay for his college books, who had held his hand through his divorce 3 years ago when his ex-wife left him for her personal trainer. Instead, he nodded. "Tamika's right, Mom. We think you'd be happier with your own space." The words hit me like a physical blow. I actually felt my chest tighten as if someone were squeezing my lungs. "Happier, Darius? I lost everything yesterday. Everything. And you think I'd be happier alone in a hotel room than here with my family?" "It doesn't have to be a hotel," Tamika said quickly. "There are some lovely extended stay places near the mall, very clean, very safe. And they have little kitchenettes so you can cook for yourself." I stared at this woman, who had only been in my son's life for 2 years, telling me where I should live after losing my home. And how am I supposed to pay for this lovely extended stay place? The insurance money won't arrive for weeks. Darius shifted uncomfortably. "I could help out with that. A few $100 to get you started." "A few $100? As if I were a distant relative he barely knew, not the woman who gave him life. "Darius," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I changed your diapers. I rocked you through your colic. I taught you how to ride a bike and I helped you with your homework. I held you when you cried because Lucia Velasco broke your heart in high school." His face twisted slightly, but Tamika squeezed his arm harder. "No one's questioning your history," she said. "We just think everyone would be more comfortable with some boundaries." Boundaries? I'd heard that word from the therapist Darius had seen after his divorce. Everything was about boundaries. "You're kicking me out," I said bluntly. "We're not kicking you out," Darius protested. "We're just saying that maybe this arrangement wouldn't work for anyone." "Whose idea was this?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. I could see it in the way Tamika leaned back slightly, satisfied, as if she had won something. "We discussed it together," Darius said, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. I stood up slowly, my knees cracking in a way that reminded me I was 65 and alone in the world. "I understand. Mom, don't be like that. We're trying to do what's best for everyone." "What's best for everyone?" I repeated the words as if they were in a foreign language. "What would be best for everyone, Darius, is if your mother didn't have to sleep on the street tonight." Tamika's perfectly made-up face twisted into an expression of concern. "You don't have to sleep on the street. Like I said, there are options." I looked around the flawless living room one last time, at the family photos that included Darius and Tamika but none of me, at the expensive furniture no one was allowed to truly live on, at my son, who had chosen this cold, beautiful woman over his own mother. "You're right," I finally said. "There are always options." I picked up my small suitcase. Its weight felt heavier now that I knew where I wasn't welcome. Darius stood up, looking uneasy, but not uneasy enough to change his mind. "I'll call you in a few days," he said. "As soon as you get settled somewhere." "Don't bother. I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. I wouldn't want to invade your sanctuary. Tamika had the decency to look slightly ashamed, but not enough to speak up, not enough to say, "Wait, this is wrong. She's your mother." I walked out of that perfect house with its perfect couple, and its perfect boundaries, and stood on the sidewalk for a long time before I could bring myself to move. Through the front window I could see Darius and Tamika talking, probably about how difficult I was being, how much drama I was bringing into their peaceful lives. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had spent years after Clarence died telling myself I was strong, independent, that I didn't need anyone. Now, when I truly needed help, I realized that independence is a luxury you can only afford when you have options. I walked to a little budget hotel on the corner, and spent almost all the money I had left on a room for the night. Sitting on the hard bed, staring at the peeling walls, I tried to figure out where a 65-year-old woman with almost no money and just one suitcase of cheap clothes was supposed to go. That's when I remembered the business card I'd carried in my wallet for nearly 40 years. It had miraculously survived because it was with me at the time of the fire. It was yellowed with age and soft from being handled so much. It was a card I never thought I'd actually use, from a man I loved when the world was young and everything seemed possible. Malcolm Hayes, the man who promised to come back for me, one day before life got in the way and the day never came. I spent 3 nights in that cheap hotel before I could work up the courage to make the call. 3 nights waking up with a sore back from the thin mattress and the bitter taste of shame in my mouth. 3 nights listening to arguments in the hallway, and the constant noise of traffic outside the poorly insulated window. 3 nights washing my few new clothes in the small bathroom, and hanging them to dry on the room's single chair. The business card felt like tissue paper between my fingers, worn smooth from 4 decades of being carried but never used. Malcolm Hayes was printed in faded blue ink. Below that was a phone number with an area code I didn't recognize. On the back, in my own youthful handwriting, were the words, "Never forget G." I had written those words when I was 25, believing with the absolute certainty of youth that Malcolm Hayes would be the great love of my life. He was 26, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and eyes the color of golden amber. He worked for his father's construction company after college and dreamed of bigger things, of building something that mattered. We dated for 9 months, which at 25 felt like an eternity. He used to take me to the overlook on the hills outside the city, where we'd sit on the hood of his car and talk about our plans. "I'm going to start my own business," he'd tell me. "Something with construction or real estate development. Something that makes me rich enough to give you everything you deserve. I'll come back for you, Loretta." He promised me the night before he left for a project in Atlanta. "I'm going to make something of myself, and then I'll come back and marry you." But promises made at 25 have a way of fading when real life takes over. He wrote letters at first, long, passionate letters full of dreams and plans. I wrote back, telling him about my job at the bank and how I was waiting just as I'd promised. Then the letters became shorter and less frequent. When I met Clarence 6 months later at a church event, Randall felt like a beautiful dream I'd once had, too good to be real. Clarence was steady and reliable, already 32, and with a good job at the phone company. He didn't promise me the world, but he promised me a house, a family, security. When he proposed after 5 months of dating, I said yes. I put Randall's business card in the pocket of my wedding dress, a secret talisman I couldn't bring myself to throw away. Now, 40 years later, sitting in a cheap hotel room that smelled of damp and stale cigarettes, I wondered what had become of that dreamy man with the amber eyes. I had followed his life sporadically over the years, the way you do with first loves. Through mutual friends, I heard that he had made good on his promises, that he had started a construction firm, that he had become a big deal. He never married, which surprised people. They said he was too busy building his empire, that Galloway was always ambitious. The last I heard, maybe 8 years ago, his company had expanded beyond Georgia to Atlanta, Georgia, and Miami, Florida. Galloway Development, building shopping centers and office complexes. The young man from the construction firm had become the kind of man who wore expensive suits and made decisions that affected hundreds of people. What would that man want with a 65-year-old widow staying in a budget hotel with nothing but a suitcase of clothes from Target? The rational part of my brain said it was ridiculous, even pathetic. You don't call someone after 40 years because your life has fallen apart. You don't look up your young love when you're old, desperate, and have nowhere to go. But rational thought is a luxury when you're counting the quarters in your purse and trying to figure out if you have enough for one more night's stay. On the fourth morning, I couldn't take it anymore. My back was killing me from the hard mattress. The money was running out, and the hotel had already warned me that they'd need the room for a booking coming in the next day. I sat at the room's little table staring at the card, my hands trembling with more than just the morning chill. What would I say? Hello, Randall. Remember me? I'm homeless now. Can you help? The number on the card was probably disconnected, or it would ring through to some secretary who would politely inform me that Mr. Galloway was far too important to take calls from random women claiming to have known him in their youth. But what if it wasn't? What if he answered? My heart pounded as I dialed the number. Each digit felt like a step off a cliff. It rang once, twice. Galloway Development. Randall speaking. His voice was deeper now, shaped by time and responsibility, but unmistakably his. After 40 years, I would have recognized it anywhere. I almost hung up, almost pressed the end call button and tried to find some other solution. But something in his tone, some warmth that seemed to reach through the phone and wrap around me like a blanket, made me speak. Randall, it's Loretta. Loretta Thorne. Well, I'm Loretta Roberts now, but I used to be Thorne. There was silence long enough for me to think that maybe the call had dropped, or maybe he'd hung up, or maybe he had no idea who I was. Then, Loretta, he said, just my name, spoken like a prayer or a wonder, as if he couldn't believe it. I'm so sorry to call you like this. I rushed on, the words tumbling out in my desperation to explain before he could hang up. I know it's been a long time, and I probably shouldn't be calling, but I just didn't know who else to turn to. Where are you? He interrupted, his voice sharp with concern. I'm in Atlanta at a hotel called the Maple Inn. And I know this sounds crazy, but my house burned down last week. I lost everything, and my son doesn't want me to stay with him, and I have nowhere to go. The words spilled out in a torrent, each one harder to say than the last. Admitting that your own son had rejected you was like admitting that you had failed at the most fundamental part of being human. Give me the exact address, Randall said, his voice now entirely professional. I'm coming to get you. You don't have to do that. I don't know why I called. I guess I just needed to hear a friendly voice. Loretta. His tone allowed no argument. Tell me where you are. I'm walking to my car right now. Over the phone, I could hear the sound of a door closing, an engine starting. He was really coming. This man I hadn't spoken to in 40 years was dropping whatever important business he was doing to rescue me from a budget hotel. I gave him the address, my voice barely a whisper. Randall, I'm not the girl you remember. Neither am I, he said, and I could hear. The smile I could hear in his voice. I'd been waiting 40 years for this call. After we hung up, I spent the next hour packing my few belongings, alternating between feeling panicked and utterly disbelieving. What was I doing? What were we doing? This was absolutely insane. You simply couldn't pick up a relationship after 4 decades as if you were merely continuing a conversation from the day before. But as I gazed out the hotel window, waiting for a car I wouldn't recognize, carrying a man who might not even recognize me, I experienced a sensation I hadn't felt since before the fire. Hope. Perhaps it was foolish hope. Maybe it would only lead to more disappointment, more heartbreak, but it was hope nonetheless. And at 65, with virtually nothing left to lose, hope was certainly worth the risk. At precisely 10:45, a gleaming silver Mercedes pulled up in front of the hotel, its polished surface contrasting starkly against the worn backdrop of the street. I peered out the window as the car parked, my heart beating rapidly against my ribs like a bird desperately trying to escape its cage. The windows were tinted so I couldn't see inside, but something deep down inside me told me it was him. The engine shut off and the driver's side door swung open. Even after 40 long years, even with the gray hair and the lines etched around his eyes, even carrying the weight of decades I hadn't shared with him, I recognized him instantly. Malcolm Hayes stepped out of that car as if he were stepping directly out of my dreams. And as he glanced up at the window where I stood, the years seemed to crumble away between us, as if they had never even existed. I grabbed my suitcase and hurried down the stairs with the speed of someone who fears a precious dream will vanish if she waits even a moment too long. He was standing by the car, waiting patiently for me. Randall possessed the same relaxed confidence he'd had at 26, but now it was refined, burnished by success and maturity. He was wearing dark jeans and a navy blue sweater that probably cost more than I used to spend on a whole month's worth of groceries. But his eyes, those same amber eyes that had haunted my dreams for decades, were exactly as I remembered them. I suddenly wanted to hide. I desperately wanted to go back to my room and pretend that this whole thing wasn't happening. I felt like I looked terrible. My hair hadn't been cut in months. My cheap clothes were all wrinkled, and I felt incredibly small and insignificant compared to the elegant man waiting for me. But he was already smiling at me, a smile that made my heart leap as if I were 25 again. I walked slowly toward him, suddenly finding it difficult to breathe. "Hello, Loretta," he said softly. Up close, I could clearly see the changes that time had wrought. His dark hair was now salt and pepper, cut short and in a very professional style. Lines bracketed the corners of his eyes and shaped the corners of his mouth. He was broader in the shoulders, more solid, as if success had given him physical weight along with everything else. But when he smiled at me, I could still see the young man who used to take me to the Overlook and tell me all about his hopes and dreams. "Hello," I managed to say, my voice barely a whisper. He studied my face intently for a long moment, those familiar amber eyes taking in every single detail. I wanted to apologize for how I looked, for how far I'd fallen, for calling him after all those years with absolutely nothing to offer him but trouble. Instead, he spoke 3 simple words that changed absolutely everything. "You look beautiful." I burst into tears. Right there on the sidewalk in front of that budget hotel with Malcolm Hayes standing right next to me, I completely fell apart. 40 years of pent-up tears, for days of agonizing uncertainty and despair. A lifetime of being told in one way or another that I wasn't good enough. It all came pouring out in ugly, gasping sobs that I just couldn't control. He didn't say anything else. He didn't try to shush me or tell me that everything would be all right. He simply took my suitcase with one hand and wrapped his other arm tightly around me as I collapsed against his chest. He smelled of expensive cologne and clean laundry, of success and stability, of everything I had lost and everything I had never had. His sweater was incredibly soft against my cheek, and his arms felt strong and reassuring around my trembling shoulders. "I'm sorry," I choked out against his chest. "I'm so sorry, Randall. I really shouldn't have called you. I shouldn't drag you into this mess." "Sure," he murmured softly, his hand gently stroking my back. "You should have called me years ago." When the tears finally subsided, I pulled away to look at him, feeling completely embarrassed by the damp patch I'd undoubtedly left on his expensive sweater. I must look like a complete disaster. He reached out and tenderly wiped a tear from my cheek, his touch as gentle as a whisper. "You look like someone who has been through hell and managed to survive it. That's not a disaster, Loretta. That's strength." I attempted to laugh, but it came out sounding shaky and bitter. "Strength? I'm 65 years old. I'm staying in a dive hotel because my own son doesn't even want me around. That's not strength. That's just pathetic." His jaw tightened visibly, and for a fleeting moment, I saw a flicker of the anger he was trying hard to conceal. "Your son is a fool. You don't even know him." "I don't need to know him. I know you." He paused briefly, his hands still resting lightly on my shoulders. "Or at least I knew you. And the Loretta Thornton that I knew would never, ever turn away someone in need, especially if that someone was family." The way he said my maiden name, as if it were something precious that he'd carefully kept all these years, made my chest ache with a deep longing for the woman I used to be. "That was a long time ago," I said softly. "I'm not that girl anymore." "Maybe not," he agreed gently. "But I'd very much like to meet the woman she became." He carefully placed my suitcase in the trunk of his luxury car as if it contained treasure, not just a cheap bag containing everything I had left in the world. As he opened the passenger door for me, I was momentarily stunned by the surreal nature of the whole situation. On the morning of the fire, I had a house, memories, a whole life built carefully over decades. Now here I was, getting into the car of a man I hadn't seen in 40 years with absolutely no idea whatsoever what was going to happen next. "Where are we going?" I asked quietly as he started the engine. "Home," he said simply. The drive took almost an hour, passing through increasingly affluent neighborhoods until we arrived in an area I'd never even seen before. Rolling hills dotted with sprawling properties hidden behind imposing stone walls and ornate iron gates. Trees that looked as if they'd been professionally placed, and mailboxes that probably cost more than most people's cars. Randall turned into a long winding driveway marked only by a small brass plaque that simply read, "Galloway." The drive curved gracefully through mature trees and meticulously manicured gardens before opening into a circular entrance in front of a house that completely took my breath away. It wasn't flashy or ostentatious in any way. It was elegant in the way that real money often is. Subtle, confident, built to truly last. Stone and wood with tall, expansive windows that beautifully caught the afternoon light, and a welcoming porch that seemed to invite you to sit and stay a while. "Randall," I whispered, gazing at this incredible monument to everything he had achieved. This is absolutely incredible." He parked the car, but he didn't get out right away. Instead, he sat there looking at the house as if he were seeing it through my eyes. "It's too big," he said quietly. "It always has been. I built it thinking I'd fill it with someone someday. But," he shrugged, a gesture that was so familiar it made my heart ache. "Some dreams just don't work out the way you planned." "You never married?" The question slipped out before I could stop it. He turned to look at me, his expression unreadable. "I came close a couple of times, but something was always missing." He paused for a beat, then said simply, "You." The word hung suspended between us in the silent car, charged with 40 years of what-ifs and could-have-beens. I desperately wanted to ask him what he meant. I wanted to try to understand how I could have been missing from a life that I was never even a part of. But before I could even find the right words, he was already out of the car, rounding the front to open my door for me. The house was even more stunning inside than it was outside. Hardwood floors that gleamed like golden honey, incredibly high ceilings, furniture that looked like it belonged in the pages of architectural magazines, but somehow didn't feel cold or museum-like. There were books everywhere, comfortable reading chairs placed invitingly near the windows, photographs scattered casually on end tables. It truly felt like a real home where someone actually lived, not just a sterile showcase for success. "Are you hungry?" Randall asked, leading me into a kitchen that was even larger than my old living room. "I was just about to make lunch when you called." I suddenly realized that I was absolutely starving. The hotel breakfast had consisted of nothing but stale toast and weak coffee, and my stomach was cramping with emptiness and nerves. "I don't want to be any trouble," I began, but he immediately cut me off with a look. "Loretta, stop. You're not trouble. You are." He paused, searching for the right words. "You are the answer to a question that I've been asking for 40 years. And he actually knew how to cook, moving around that huge kitchen with the easy confidence of someone who had clearly learned to take care of himself. I quietly studied the photographs that were scattered throughout the room. Randall at various ribbon-cutting ceremonies, shaking hands with important-looking people. Randall with various women at charity galas and business dinners, always smiling politely, but never actually looking completely happy. "Tell me about your life," he said, placing a plate of perfectly grilled chicken and roasted vegetables in front of me. "Tell me about Clarence, about your son, about everything that I missed." So I did. Over a lunch that tasted like pure heaven after days of terrible hotel food, I told him all about my marriage to Clarence, steady and comfortable, giving me security and companionship, if not a whole lot of passion. I told him about Darius, the baby I had so desperately wanted and loved so fiercely, who grew up to be a stranger who clearly valued his fiancée's comfort over his own mother's needs. I told him about all the years I had spent being a good wife, a good mother, and then a good widow, about the devastating fire that had taken absolutely everything I owned, and then about the son who had taken everything that I had left. Randall listened without interrupting me even once, his intense amber eyes never leaving my face. When I finally finished, he was silent for a long moment. "I'm so sorry," he finally said quietly. "I'm so sorry about Clarence, about your house, and about your son, but I'm definitely not sorry that you called me." "Why?" The question came out sounding even smaller than I had intended. He reached across the table and gently took my hand in his. Still strong, still gentle, still somehow able to make my heart race even after all these years. "Because I never stopped loving you," he said quietly. "Because every single deal I made, every success I achieved, every dollar I earned, it was all so that I could be worthy of you when you finally came back to me." Randall, I know this probably sounds completely crazy. I know that 40 years is a very long time and that we're very different people now, but when I actually heard your voice on that phone today, it felt like the missing piece in my life had finally clicked into place. I looked down at our joined hands, his tanned and incredibly well kept, mine worn by years of hard work and clearly showing every single day of my 65 years. "I'm not the girl that you remember. You're better." He disagreed gently. "You're real. You've actually lived and loved and lost and survived. That 25-year-old girl was certainly beautiful, but she was only potential. You are the woman that all that potential actually grew up to be." His words settled warmly around my heart like a comfortable blanket, gently healing wounds that I didn't even realize I was still carrying. For the first time in longer than I could even remember, I felt truly seen, not as someone's mother or someone's wife or someone's burden, but simply as myself. "What happens now?" I asked quietly. Randall smiled then. That same devastating smile that had made me completely fall for him way back when the world was still young. "Now we figure out exactly what the rest of our lives are going to look like together, if you'll have me." As I sat there in his beautiful kitchen, surrounded by good food and endless possibilities, I realized that sometimes the fire that destroys your old life is simply making room for the brand new life that you were always truly meant to have. Living with Randall was like discovering a version of myself that I had completely forgotten even existed. The first week was a little strange, both of us sort of tiptoeing around each other like polite strangers sharing a common space. He gave me the entire guest suite of his spacious house, a bedroom that was larger than my old living room, a private bath with a luxurious tub that could comfortably fit 2 people, and a small sitting area that overlooked his beautifully manicured gardens. I actually felt like I was staying in some kind of luxury hotel, afraid to touch anything or leave behind too much evidence of my presence. But Randall was incredibly patient, the way that truly successful men often learn to be. And gradually I actually started to relax. He had a housekeeper, Maria, who came in 3 days a week to help out. But on the other days I unexpectedly found myself cooking for him. It started small, making coffee for him in the morning, preparing simple lunches. But Randall genuinely appreciated everything with the enthusiasm of someone who had been eating mostly buffet food and restaurant meals for several decades. "This is absolutely incredible," he said one evening, savoring the chicken and dumplings that I'd made using my grandmother's old recipe. "I haven't had a home-cooked meal quite like this in years." "It's really nothing fancy," I protested, but inside I absolutely glowed. When was the last time anyone had truly appreciated my cooking? Darius used to constantly complain that I made the same 5 basic dishes over and over again. Tamika once suggested that I should try out some more contemporary flavors for our family dinners. Randall simply shook his head gently. "It's perfect. You're perfect." That word perfect probably should have made me feel a little uneasy. I was 65 years old with gray roots starting to show and expression lines that had long since become permanent grooves. My hands were now spotted with age, my body soft and yielding in places that used to be firm and toned. I was anything but perfect. But when Randall looked at me, I saw myself reflected in his warm eyes as someone beautiful, someone worthy of love and attention and incredibly gentle care. We gradually fell into daily routines that somehow felt as natural as breathing. We ate breakfast together out on the back porch where Randall would quietly read his business reports, and I would happily watch the birds at his elaborate feeders. We took leisurely afternoon walks around the property where he proudly showed me the extensive gardens he'd planted himself, and the greenhouse where he cultivated orchids as a beloved hobby. The evenings were mostly for talking. We had 40 long years to catch up on, and we did it slowly, carefully, like experienced archaeologists patiently examining precious artifacts. I told him how incredibly hard it had been to lose Clarence, about the crushing emptiness of the house in the months that followed his passing, about how I had to literally force myself out of bed every single morning, about the profound loneliness of widowhood, and about the way that people tend to treat you like only half a person once your husband is actually gone. He told me about his thriving business, how it had steadily grown from a small construction company into a sprawling development empire with large projects in 3 different states, about the various women he had dated over the years, smart, accomplished women who looked absolutely perfect standing next to him at various charity galas, but who somehow never really made him feel whole. There was one woman, he said one night as we sat comfortably near his cozy fireplace, the rain drumming softly against the windows. Elena, she was an architect, absolutely brilliant, undeniably beautiful. Everyone told us that we were just perfect for each other. I felt a sudden pang of unexpected jealousy that surprised me with its intensity. What happened? I asked quietly. I proposed, he said simply. On Christmas Eve 5 years ago, big elaborate show, fancy restaurant overlooking the entire city, incredibly expensive ring, absolutely everything she said she wanted, and she said yes. We planned the wedding for the following summer. But as the date drew closer and closer, I kept having this nagging feeling that something just wasn't right. Not with her, she was everything that anyone could possibly want in a wife, but with me. He paused for a long moment, staring intently into the crackling fire. The night before the wedding, I called it off. Randall, no. What did you even tell her? The truth. He looked directly at me, his eyes incredibly serious. That I was still deeply in love with a woman that I'd met 40 years ago, and that it simply wouldn't be fair to marry her while my heart still belonged to someone else. His words hit me like a powerful physical blow. You actually canceled your wedding for me? For the memory of you, for the slight possibility that someday, somehow you might actually need me and that I would be here, patiently waiting. I looked at this incredibly successful, handsome man who could have truly had absolutely anyone he wanted, and I tried desperately to process what he was actually telling me. This is completely crazy, I said, shaking my head in disbelief. It truly is. He leaned forward slightly, taking both of my hands gently in his. It's even crazier that you actually kept my old business card carefully tucked away in your wallet for 40 years. He was right. We were both undeniably crazy. We were both still living with the ghosts of what might have been. But somehow, against all conceivable odds, our own particular brand of crazy had actually brought us back together again. 3 weeks after my unexpected arrival, Darius finally called. I was in Randall's spacious kitchen, happily making dinner and humming quietly to myself. Actually humming, something that I hadn't even done in years, when my phone suddenly rang. Seeing Darius's name appear on the screen made my stomach clench instantly with familiar anxiety. Hello, dear, I said, trying hard to keep my voice perfectly neutral. Mom. His tone sounded odd, almost carefully controlled. I've been trying to call you for days. Your phone keeps going straight to voicemail. That was actually true. I had been screening my calls carefully, not quite ready to deal with whatever guilt or obligation Darius might try to impose upon me. I've been busy. Busy doing what? I heard you checked out of that hotel weeks ago. Where are you even living? I glanced around Randall's beautiful kitchen, at the lovely fresh flowers he brought home that morning, at the incredibly expensive wine glasses sitting on the spotless counter. I'm actually staying with a friend. What friend? Mom, you don't have any friends with money. His casual assumption slightly offended me, partly because it had been so sadly true for such a long time after Clarence had died. I just let most of my close friendships slowly fade away, far too tired and too proud to properly maintain those relationships when I felt like I had absolutely nothing to offer in return. Would that really surprise you? I said coldly. There was a brief pause, and I could practically hear him carefully processing this surprising new information. "Mom, I actually think we need to talk. Tamika and I have been discussing the situation at length, and we both think that maybe we were just a little bit too hasty. Maybe you could actually stay in our guest room for a while, just until you can manage to get back on your own feet." The offer that would have honestly meant absolutely everything to me just a month ago now felt somehow hollow, even insulting. "What actually made you change your mind?" Another awkward pause. We realized that maybe we were just a little too focused on our own needs. Family really needs to stick together. What he actually meant, I realized with a sudden pang, was that he had probably heard through the neighborhood gossip network that his mother was no longer staying in that cheap budget hotel. Someone had likely mentioned seeing her out and about with a well-dressed man in a very nice car. Darius was undeniably curious, and that curiosity had somehow made him surprisingly generous. "That's very kind of you," I said evenly. "But I'm perfectly happy right where I am." "Mom, you really can't just move in with some complete stranger. It's really not safe. What do you even know about this person?" "I know that he's never once made me feel like I'm a burden," I said quietly. "I know that he genuinely values my company and truly appreciates my cooking, and he even tells me that I'm actually beautiful every single day. The wedding wasn't really anything like my first one. When I married Clarence 40 years ago, it was mostly about what everyone else expected us to do. White dress, traditional church ceremony, reception at the local community center with a DJ and a cash bar. We invited everyone that we knew and even several people that we didn't particularly like because that's just what you did. We performed the required ritual mostly for the community, not at all for ourselves. This time around, Randall and I did exactly what we ourselves actually wanted to do. The simple ceremony took place right in his backyard on a crisp November morning, exactly 5 months after that unexpected phone call in the hotel. The pastor was an old friend of Randall's, and the only official witnesses were Maria, his longtime housekeeper, and Marcus, Randall's trusted business partner and best friend of 25 years. I wore a simple blue dress that Randall said perfectly matched the color of my eyes, and he wore a distinguished gray suit that made him look incredibly handsome. No fuss, no fanfare, and absolutely no stress about trying to impress anyone. Just two ordinary people who had somehow found each other again after 4 long decades, promising to spend whatever precious time they had left here together. Darius actually came to the wedding. I had honestly debated whether or not to even invite him, but Randall had ultimately convinced me to try just one more time. "He's still your son," he had said simply. "You'll probably regret it if you don't at least give him the chance to try and make it right." So, I finally called him exactly 2 weeks before the small ceremony. "Randall and I are getting married," I said flatly. "November 15th at 2 p.m. You're welcome to come if you'd like, but Tamika is definitely not invited." He did show up alone, looking predictably uncomfortable in a suit that probably cost more than my entire monthly grocery budget. He shook Randall's hand politely. He made some obligatory small talk and even managed a strange, strained smile when the kind pastor declared us officially husband and wife. But I could clearly see the subtle calculation in his wary eyes. The way he carefully took inventory of Randall's large house, his luxury car, and all the other obvious markers of undeniable wealth. This morning I woke up safely in Randall's loving arms, in my husband's warm arms, in the peaceful room that had gradually become ours, in the beautiful house that had ultimately become our cherished home. Sunlight streamed cheerfully through the windows, overlooking the gardens that we now tended together with loving care, and I could clearly smell the rich coffee that Randall lovingly makes every morning before I even wake up. At 66 years old, I am honestly happier than I've ever truly been. Not because of Randall's considerable money or his beautiful house or even his incredible success, but because someone actually sees me, truly sees me, and intentionally chooses to absolutely love what he sees. The devastating fire took my old life away completely. It utterly consumed it and completely turned it into ash. But sometimes I actually think, as I watch Randall peacefully read his morning paper across the breakfast table, that destruction is really just another word for complete and total renewal. Sometimes you actually have to lose everything that you thought you always wanted in order to finally find everything that you've always truly needed. And sometimes, if you are very, very lucky indeed, your first true love actually gets a precious second chance to become your forever love. The old business card that I somehow kept carefully tucked away for 40 long years is now proudly framed, sitting prominently on Randall's large desk in his home office. A constant reminder that some promises are definitely worth keeping, even when it takes more than 4 decades to finally deliver on them. Did you like the story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you liked the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story. With love and respect.